Kia ora, and welcome to another episode of the Aotearoa Guitar Show. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Morgan-Edmonds of the metal band Alien Weaponry. Tu's mostly known for his bass playing in the band, but he's also an accomplished lead guitar player and multi-instrumentalist. We talk about his favorite places to eat on the road, subreddits, the guitars he likes to play, what inspires him when he's creating music, and discuss a little bit about what the band has coming up next. Kia ora.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm all right. Yeah, thanks for joining. I'm having a lot of fun with the show and getting some good folks on, and you've been on the list for quite a while. So.
Oh yeah, awesome. No, yeah, we could make it work.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's much easier for me to get me to do stuff because I'm not bound by the management that the boys are under, you know.
Yeah.
Like as the session musician, I'm my own boss.
Gotcha.
So there's no middleman.
Nice. Yeah, I was actually that's on the list of questions. Was a little description of how the session bit goes. Right. Yeah. So again, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. If you're cool with it, I'll just launch into it and
let's do it.
Sweet. So, how long have you been playing music?
Well, the very first instrument I ever picked up was piano. So I'm a classically trained pianist first and foremost, and I started doing that when I was about 6 years old. I started playing piano, and then it wasn't until, and that's all I played until I was about 11 to memory. I always get a bit cloudy on what exactly age I was, but around 11 is when I picked up the guitar for the first time. My dad is like a casual guitar player, like guitar singer, you know, in the Māori context, you know, there's always someone who just plays guitar to strum and sing songs. So that's my dad. And so he would always be playing and singing in our house. And I was always like, man, that's cool. But I was, you know, piano focused. And it wasn't until, I was about 11 and I was like, I think I was still playing piano, but I was like, I want to pick up something else as well. So I started playing guitar. And then really fell in love with that. Became my sort of main instrument first and foremost. And then for a while there, I also played drums because my younger brother was a drummer. So he taught me how to play drums. And I picked that up. Although I haven't played that in a few years now. And then I tried to do saxophone and I tried to do violin for a bit there too. But then I went off to university. And it got very busy and I wasn't able to have all my equipment. So I only took my guitar with me when I was in uni. So they kind of fell off to the side. I still have them though. I still have my saxophone and my violin. So one day I would like to, try pick that up again.
Nice.
And then when Alien Weaponry reached out for the audition was when I played a bass for the very first time. So they already knew that I played guitar because we went to school together and we'd played in bands. Like casual bands together for like talent shows and stuff. But they were like, oh, well, you can play guitar. And so I'm sure you can pick up a bass. I was like, yeah, sure. I'll take a look. And so I went down to the local music store and picked up my first bass and did the audition. So, and I'm about to turn 25 in a month. So however many years that is, nearly 20 years of playing an instrument, but definitely about 14, coming on 15 years of playing guitar specifically.
Nice. Yeah, I hear you on the instrument sitting in the corner for one day picking up and learning better. I have a mandolin over here that I bought, about 20 years ago. So,
right.
Something along those lines. So, yeah, it's like one of those things where I think I got into a car wreck, right? And they rear-ended me and then there was an insurance payout and I was like, sweet, I'll buy an instrument. So,
there's definitely a few more on the list. Ones like that, that I would like, I would love to pick up some of those more eccentric instruments at some point.
Yeah, nice. Very nice. So yeah, you're definitely a multi-instrumentalist. That's really cool. Do you find it easy like switching between them when you're writing?
I do when they're things that require, my fingers. So it's like piano to guitar to bass and all those things are like relatively thick in nature. Like when it goes into drums, I can play them, but it takes me a bit to get back in the flow of it. Or, that was the thing that I found the hardest about the saxophone when I tried to learn was like, it was a completely different set of skills. I mean, the finger part is there, but that wasn't the hard bit, it was like, it's all of a sudden you're adding this other element to creating the sound. I was like, whoa, muscles that are not trained at all. So you're essentially at square one, where it was like, having piano, I think, as a bass instrument was like made a lot of that other instrument picking up very easy, because it was, it covers both ends of the spectrum. You got right hand, you got left hand, you got both, you got your feet going for the pedals, so I think it was such a good bassline instrument to have, that when I went to guitar, I feel like I progressed pretty quickly in that initial stages. And when I first started playing guitar, I actually started playing through like flamenco, because it helped translate just that finger skills and lots of finger style stuff, which then translated very easily over onto bass, when I went to do all the audition for the band. So yeah, for that sort of stringed instrument or finger heavy instruments, I find it pretty straightforward. The only thing is that I have a little hard time with these days is like if we've been on tour and I've been almost exclusively on bass, all of a sudden when I have to go and hit a guitar, it's like you've got to recalibrate your fingers to just come back into small. You've got to like bring them in, and that I find quite hard, especially in the space between strings. I have to retrain the accuracy side of things when it comes to jumping back on a guitar.
Yeah. Do you play, when you play bass, do you play typically with fingers or pick or mixture?
Predominantly with fingers. We're sponsored by Intune picks, like the company that make like the custom picks. So we get sent them to like throw out into the crowd, and I always found it kind of strange to like throw out a pick that I don't use. So there are a few songs that I'm like, well, if anything, sonically these bits suit the attack aggression of a pick. So like I'll play for like 30 seconds just so I can say that it was actually used, and then throw it out to the crowd. But predominantly I prefer to play with my fingers because I drop the picks a lot, particularly on bass, especially when we're running around and jumping around and like giving it the whole performance thing. I find I have more control when I use my fingers, and it was one of the reasons they ended up hiring me. As far as I'm aware, the sort of top pick out of the audition pool were all guitar players going into bass. But obviously Ethan, who I was replacing, was a bass player. So he was all finger playing. And so I was the only one, I think, that auditioned with my fingers. And so they were like, that's a sound that we want, because that's the sound that our the previous bass player was. So it ended up coming in handy.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I saw you all perform at the Haka World Record, which was
nice.
Amazing. I wasn't. Let me rephrase that. I watched it on TV because I couldn't actually get down there for the actual event. But yeah, it was an amazing show. I was super happy to see you all playing there, because that was pretty impactful, and I thought it was great. I do have to ask the burning question, which was, the mix seemed way off.
Well, yeah, we were the last show of the night, and normally it's an unfortunate thing to say, but as a metal act in New Zealand, it's quite often we run into issues in events that are organized in this country that are sort of limited in what they can provide you. It's not new news to the boys before I was a part of the band, and then it hasn't changed since we've joined. But in our minds, we were hopeful because other fellow Polynesian band Shepherd's Reign were also performing that day, and their performance was great. They had no issues, and we were like, "Oh, awesome! This is going to be great." And then many hours passed between them and us, and we were the last act of the night, and the organization in general was like, people who had just got to go up there and sing with a microphone and not be a whole band sorts of situations. And so there's a lot more things that could go wrong for us. And when we went on stage, the guitars were not patched. So they were playing on stage live. So for us, we had no idea there was anything wrong, because the physical amps were blasting out, but the mics that would go out the PA or go to the live feed were not. So that was a shame. It was a shame. We were the only one, I think, that had anything go wrong, and we were lucky last, so it was definitely disappointing. But we were happy because we were just very happy to be a part of the event. We were like, luckily, one song, it's at the end of the night. Most people are gone home by that point, and because it was cold or whatever. So it was just and I think fortunately for us, we're such physical performers that the crowd at least still has a good time, just by watching. It's not like we're just standing still and then they can't hear something. I think luckily our physicality helps the crowd just stay entertained, even if they're like, there's something a little weird here, like, well, there's something going on, or is it just quiet, or is it just the wind? What is it? But it wasn't until afterwards they were like, the local crew were like, sorry. And we were like, oh, what happened? And they were like, oh, your guitars weren't on the entire time. And we were like, oh, really? Oh, that sucks. But it is what it is.
Yeah. The two things that I noticed about it was that, one, like, I could definitely hear your bass playing a bit more because because the guitar was out. But the second thing that I noticed was that I was like, oh, thank heavens, Lewis had a half stack on stage, because you could still hear the guitar. It was loud enough that that it was still bleeding through, which was I think kind of saved it overall for
yes.
for me.
I think so. And that's one of those moments where you go, because from a crew perspective, we're always kind of like, and as a band that's not quite, big enough to just have whatever we want on an international scale, we're in that point where we're sort of like, do we get rid of the cabs, to try and thing? And then there's moments like that you go, thank God we had cabs.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So when you all are touring, do you take most of your equipment, or do you do backline, or?
Well, fortunately, the band, before my time, had spent a lot of time and effort building, storage supplies in each territory. A territory is being Europe and North America. So they have a storage facility in the US that has, like 10 guitars in it and a drum kit and, that sort of stuff. And our current touring crew through Europe, our sound guy / tour manager runs a touring company. And because we're sort of his, I suppose, main band, he allows us to store stuff in his facility, so
nice.
Which makes it nice and easy as well. And then he has control of it from a crew perspective, that like sometimes we show up and he goes, oh, I got rid of these and we changed this up, and we got a new rig now and a new fly case, and it's like a little bit better. So in the Europe side of things, our setup is really sort of locking in for our size, which is really nice. And we haven't we haven't done the US with that current crew yet, so we're not entirely sure what the state of our US stuff is yet. But yeah, we try to minimize the amount that we have to fly with, of course, because for us that's like a huge chunk of our budget is flying. So for me, Lewis currently flies with 2 guitars, which are his 7 strings and appropriate spare, and I fly with all 4 basses. And Henry still flies with his drum trap. And if we needed our backdrop, we only have 1 copy of our backdrop. But that's a lot down from what it was even when I joined the band. We were like flying with heaps of bags, and it's like it's a lot. It's a lot. And then when you do that, you run the risk too of having something go wrong and losing it, and then having to chase it down at the other end and missing shows or whatever, or having to borrow. We did that on one tour. We had to borrow some random dude's guitar from another band because we're like, the airport has it somewhere. So
right, yeah. Oh, that's great. What's your favorite country that you've visited so far?
I do, from a touring perspective, like as in life on the road, the United States is easily the most comfortable country to tour in. It's the country of abundance. They've got everything at all hours of the day. So because of course the touring lifestyle is a relatively reduced lifestyle to a normal lifestyle. So it's kind of one of those things where you appreciate every little thing you can get. And the United States provides that. In terms of countries I've been to just as like wow, this is cool to be here, Spain is definitely up there. And also Spain in terms of the crowds over there. We really, really love the Spanish crowds. The same applies to Scandinavia. Beautiful place, beautiful. As a country perspective, like it's just stunning. And then they've also got great crowds, particularly for heavy metal. It's like kind of their thing. And they're all those countries have like a different quality. Like Spain, we love because they sing. they're not so much on the mosh pit department, but they're really vocal, you know. So like, which is cool for us as we sing in a different language. You still have a country singing in that language, but then the Scandinavians are all about the mosh pit, and so they're in there and they're rowing and they're doing their whole like, you know, the chants and stuff. And so there's like different energies, and so many places you know, have their own. And then Poland, we love Poland because Poland always provides a very nice night out, a very cool, fun night out on Poland. So, you know, there's always these little things. Seldom do we come across many countries that we don't like being in.
Yeah, yeah. The crowds, do you find that most of them that come and see you have basically the Te Reo lyrics memorized and are singing right along with you?
Yeah, so on this most recent tour that we just did, you know, within the past 3 months, something that I included into our live show was as good as I can. Obviously, I need glasses, and I don't wear glasses on stage, and I don't wear contacts on stage, and so I basically can't see anything. I can see the front few rows, but I try to, while I'm performing and, you know, interacting with the crowd, I try to see if there's someone in there who is, you know, really singing the lyrics as much as they can. And I always try to give them a shout out, you know, particularly because it's a different language, you know, and so it's always it's a fun little moment. And, you know, that whoever that person is, always, it feels cool for them, you know, because they're like, oh, wow, you noticed me singing and whatever. But it will always still surprises me, you know, like, man, we're really in the middle of nowhere, Germany, and someone is in there singing every single word, you know. Yeah. And the ones that I really love is the Maori song, and they're singing every word. And then as soon as it comes to the English song, they're like, just like, they're like, I don't know this. I don't know the words to this. And I'm like, wow, that's so funny.
Yeah, that is funny. That's great. So did you study music in uni as well?
I didn't. Okay. No. So music for me was always predominantly a hobby. Believe it or not, I was always very shy. I didn't like performing in front of people. I didn't even like playing in front of my family. Like, I would just like to sit in my room. It was just like to do it to myself, you know, with myself kind of thing. So when I went to uni, I actually did Māori studies, and I was a design student.
Oh, nice.
So design was like the thing that I wanted to do for a living. And I was kind of surprised with myself actually when the boys even reached out, that I was like, yeah, actually, you know, because like if they'd asked me even a couple of years earlier, I probably would have said no, because I was like, no way am I getting on stage in front of people. But there was a few factors in that. I think bass was the main one. In my head, I was like, oh, it's bass. No offense to any born and raised bass players, but in my head, I was like, oh, it's easy. You know, for me, it was like the guitar. I was predominantly a lead guitar player, and I would always freak out about, you know, playing it perfectly. I'd get like a real big stage fright thing. When it was the bass, all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm not, you know, I'm not so like in the front and center, I suppose, which is in reality is not quite the case in this band. There's only 3 of us, so everyone kind of gets equal airtime. But like from a musical perspective, it's just kind of sitting in there and driving that. But, you know, if you slip up a note on the bass, 9 out of 10 times people aren't even going to notice. You know, it's so down there in under the drums or whatever, just keeping you just notice when it's gone. You know, if the bass cuts out, all of a sudden everyone's like, what the heck is going on? But like a fret's different of a note, no one's going to notice. So I just was able to just really relax and just have fun and stomp around and, you know, be crazy, which I really enjoyed, because there was an American tour we did in 2021. On the second album, I actually did a guitar solo on the album, because they wanted a guitar solo, but our main guitarist doesn't really do lead. He's more of a rhythm guy. And they wanted to play it live. So we did this weird thing where I played guitar like for one song. And I found myself getting nervous all of a sudden, you know, where I'd been doing all these tours and I was having a blast on the bass, and I had to play guitar for 2.5 minutes, and I would like freak out again. And I was like, oh yeah, no, this is not. Because I know a lot of fans have been like, oh, it would be awesome if 2 played lead guitar and Ethan came back and played bass. And I was like, I don't actually think I would. Or I'd have to be, if that circumstance ever came about, not that the band is considering that, but like I would have to be much further in the career of it to have it become like second nature, because I'm still get like, ooh.
Yeah. That triggered something I was going to ask you about too. So when you're writing, or is it, and this kind of comes back to that whole session musician versus, you know, I don't know what else to call it, full band member or whatever you want to call it. Are you writing collaboratively with the boys? And how does that usually work out?
Yeah, so this is why whenever I make these videos talking about this, because it's one of those things a lot of people don't quite understand. Even for me, I mean, I was learning it as I'm going. Like they just asked me to be in the band. I'm like, yeah, cool, whatever. And then as I've been doing it, it's like, oh, it works like this. Oh, it works like this. But even then, this band is a little from the other bands out there that I've talked to. Our situation is a little. I like to say it's very New Zealander. It's a lot more casual the way that this band approaches it, which has its positives and has its negatives. Like sometimes it's like, well, at the same time, legally speaking, this is a different, we're on two ends of the spectrum. I like that you treat me like an equal, but there are certain circumstances where I, on paper, am not, So when it comes to writing, they were pretty casual. They were like, yeah, we'd love to have you be a part of the writing process, and you get your part, you're worth, we're not, you can either write for them and be paid out, or like you write for somebody and you get your royalties or whatever, which is that kind of session thing.
Yep.
And then of course you'll have the session musician who's different to the touring musician. So whoever's on stage is different to who was in the studio or doing the writing or whatever. Fortunately for me, I'm both. So, because I got not in trouble, but I was corrected by our management because I made the videos. I just called myself a session musician because I'm in a unique circumstance where I'm both a session musician and a touring musician. But they're like, oh, it's actually they're actually can be very different. So yeah, I write for the band. So especially on this upcoming third album that we've been working on, because when I joined the band on the second one, they'd predominantly done all the writing. So I just provided vocals, except for that guitar solo. Even the bass had already been recorded. So this most recent album that we're working on was my first like full start to finish process with the band on the album, which was just quite cool because writing music is something I've always done. So it wasn't something that I had to be like, oh, I don't really know how to do that. I would say lyrics has been the thing that I've had to like adapt into, but from a musical perspective, I've been writing music most of my life in different genres, so it was just kind of second nature, and it was quite a fun process, and a lot of it, I'm just do it all here in my room, and then write, I don't know, 30 songs, and then send it to them, and they can pick their favorite 5 or favorite 10, and then they have their songs, and then we would mash it all together, and then when we take them into the studio, then the producer gets their hands on it and flips it all up again anyway. So yeah, it's quite a fun little fun seeing what songs sort of change, what songs don't change, what is it in these patterns that are cool. And I like really nerded out on this because I'm the only one in the band that has any music theory education. And so I like went super nerd mode and like listened to both Alien Weaponry albums and made a spreadsheet and how long they are, the structures to the streams, like what might be popular, what structures are popular, and tried to apply it to the writing, because what was a bit of a, not a challenge, but something I had to sort of be aware of was writing music for a band that has already an established sound. I'm not just writing music I want to write necessarily. I mean, obviously I want to write it, but sonically speaking or thematically, it has to be appropriate for the band in which you're writing for. So it's like no use me writing some sludge doom track on an Alien Weaponry album, right? So that was kind of a cool exercise.
Nice. And I've seen your Twitch streams and your YouTube videos about your writing process, and those are super cool and enjoyed those a lot. And I noticed that you seem very, very at home doing that on a Twitch stream where you have an audience, but then you're talking about the nervousness on stage. And so how is that different for you? Like what is that separation for you? Is it just simply because it's just text on a screen when you're hearing from people on a Twitch stream, or? Yeah,
it's a funny thing too, because people, even when it's outside of the context of music, just my normal live streaming where I'm just talking or whatever, it's very comfortable for me, but I don't like public speaking either. People go, oh man, you must be so good at public speaking. I'm like, no, I hate it. I'm like, I don't know what the difference is about being in front of the camera, but like, I don't know if it's the location, because I don't like live streaming in public. like that for me is like, ugh. But in the privacy of an office or my own space. So I think a part of it's that's the environment helps me. Like, oh yeah, I'm just casual at home. There's no when there's some of those live streams, it's just an insight into things. It's like I don't need to be correct. There's no right way to write the song, and I can do as many takes as I want. You're playing live, of course. There's an expectation that they're going to get the song that they want out of you, and that they want it to sound like what they're used to hearing. So I think all those sorts of things kind of pile on because I even surprised myself, like how relaxed I am to just play guitar on a live stream versus having to play it on stage. Even though arguably sometimes there's the same amount of people in the, technically in the numbers wise.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you consider yourself an introvert in general?
Yes. It's something I have definitely gotten better at. And this is a funny thing. I made a couple of videos talking about, people who'd come to see us perform and they go, wow, you got such a great stage presence, and you look very confident on stage. How did you develop that? And I was like, yeah, it's funny because there are some videos out there for keen-eyed searches of me performing in high school. And I'm like this, like, hiding in the corner, like look like I'd want to die. And I was like, people think it was all about, must have been lots of music and stuff. And I was like, no, I always credit for a while, the last job I had before I joined the band, I was a bartender. And I always credit that job as being a huge training and improvement in my social confidence. And I don't know why. I'm still not entirely sure if it was conscious or it just happened because of the environment. But there was something about the fact that obviously it's a hospitality job, so you got to talk to people. And any job I'd had before that, I was never on the front because I wasn't comfortable with like that sort of thing. But I think there was this like the nighttime thing, the alcohol thing meant that the people you're talking to, it's very likely they're not even going to know that you had this conversation in the morning, so it was kind of like a good way for me to practice this interaction with people who were already there to have a good time. It's not like you can expect people to get upset with you in a grocery store because you don't have enough lettuce. It's like, as long as you get someone their drink, they're going to be having a good time. So there's kind of this thing. And so I always credit that job as really boosting my social confidence. So then when it came to the band thing, it like really boosted that up real quick. And then all the social media stuff separate to the band has really, really forced me to like because I get recognized in public way more for my TikTok content and stuff than I do for the band these days. And so sometimes now it's like, I've had to really get good at doing small talk and, all these things with people as you bump into them and they want photos and that. And instead of just, I don't really like just being like, take a photo and then move on. It's like, oh, nice to meet you. And I want to do a little something, particularly, of course, because I think this happens to a lot of people in these scenarios with balance. But like, these people that are taking photos paid my bills,
Right.
I'm like, they're an important part of why I can even do this. So at least giving them a semblance of my time. And I mean, for me, I like getting rid of the, when it's just the username 818217. I'm like, I don't know who this is. This could be anybody. You know what I mean? Like, so there's something for me. I actually quite have enjoyed this, the public side of taking photos. It's like starts to put faces to these people that support you, and but I would still definitely say, even though I've gotten better at it, that I definitely have those introverted qualities. There are certain times where that social battery is like,
yeah,
it's like the funny thing is like you would be doing a show and then you're all in the adrenaline mode of doing a show, which is cool. And then you go do the photos and it's like, woohoo, yeah, great. Thank you, glad you enjoyed the show. I'm going to bed. It's like, boom. And maybe the others are like, oh, you want to go out too? Or, you want to go get a drink or something? I was like, nah, I'm done. I'm like, I'm ready to go. I want to watch a movie, get in my bunk and watch a movie, and go to sleep. Yeah. So, but I've definitely gotten better at it for sure.
Nice. Very nice. So your onstage rig rundown, what does that typically look like?
Oh yeah, no, this is the one thing that always surprises people. I'm not a tech head, I'm like, I barely know how to change the strings on my bass. You know what I mean? I'm like super simple. I've always been like that. And even as a guitar player, I would always just take it to the guys and in the local shop and be like, "Can you just string this, please?" Which is always funny because one of my best mates, who was my guitar mate, he's like the opposite. He's like the pedal board that's about as big as the houses, and it's like the whole thing. And I was always like amp guitar. So on stage, when I first started, it was a little more complex. And then as I've sort of become, more a part of the band and have had the luxury to kind of push and pull what works for me and what works for my tech, we've really slimmed down. So on my, not using the Haka show as an example, because that was all borrowed stuff, but like my current touring rig is, I use a Dark Glass Alpha Omega 900 is like my amp header, no cabs. So that just straight to DI. Straight out the front of house, and my pedal board is pretty straightforward. It's got the Sans amp on it, and then it's got I never actually know what this pedal is called, but it's only used in 2 songs. It's mostly known as the Kaitangata ugly chord at the very front. They blow the horn to boo, and then it goes gang. Everyone thinks that's guitar, but that's actually a super distorted bass. And like this ugly dissonant chord. So it's only used for that little thing. And then that's it. And then my wireless receiver and tuner. So, I like to keep a relatively simple rig. I do have Dark Glass cabs as a backup. So, we carry one in the trailer just in case, like for situations where, the patching doesn't work and you just need a but if everything's going smoothly, then it's nothing. It's literally just amp. And my pedal board now is not even on stage either. It's being manually controlled by my tech side of stage too, because I was never, for some reason, I could never quite get that coordination down when we were performing. And I was like, I kept missing cues and, I get caught up in the performing or whatever. And then my tech was like, dude, you don't even really use it. So let's just put it on the side of stage rig and I'll just click it for the odd song. And I was like, that would be great. It's not like I have expression pedals or anything that I need to play with. So it's a pretty bare bones. I think that the Dark Glass and the Sans amp carry a lot of the weight. And then the basses themselves are all Spectre. So Spectre endorsed, and so they carry the brunt of the sound.
Nice. And I think I saw you playing a Schecter on one of the it wasn't a live stream, but it was the writing.
Yeah. In terms of the guitars, I've got a whole stack of different brands in that, and so the latest one I just got, we have just recently built a relationship with ESP. So I got a nice new Evertune. Because I'd never had an Evertune before, and we saw one when we were in the studio, and I was like, wow, this thing's like crazy as. I was like, and this will make my life very easy going forward for creating the demos and making sure everything is nice and tight and not so sloppy. So that's cool. But yeah, it's like I've got a Fender Strat, which was my dad's guitar that he gave me. And then I got an Ibanez back there, 2 Schecters. I have one that was made by my dad's friend, so that's just like a custom Les Paul body guitar. And then my new ESP, which is sitting side of stage. And I just recently sold the first guitar I ever bought myself was a Ibanez JS, Joe Satriani's signature range, because he was like my guitar idol when I was first learning. So I've definitely picked up a few over the years and gotten rid of a few over the years too. I used to have this weird PRS 7-string. That was a very strange 7-string. It was like a super wide neck. It was like nearly unplayable. But at the time I needed a 7-string when I joined the band to write music for the band. And the shop I went to had nothing but that. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll pick that up. And then I swapped it out for that Schecter that you would have seen, which was much nicer.
Yeah. So PRS, known for their 7-string instruments.
Yeah, I know. It was super strange. He was like, this is a little weird, but we have a PRS 7. And like the neck was like, it's like they hadn't changed anything about the PRS. They just added another string. And I was like, what? It was like you needed some monster hand to play it. It was a very strange guitar.
Yeah. Are there any guitars that you've let go of or sold that you wish you had back?
Well, the Joe Satriani one, because it was my first, and I literally just sold it this year too, like this is recent. And I'd had it probably nearly for 10 years, because it was my first one, and I always held on to it very dearly, but I hadn't played it in probably 5 years because I hate, like I said, I'm not much of a tech head, and the Floyd Rose was like the bane of my existence. And I would take it into the shop all the time just for something to go wrong. And I don't live far away, but it's like a 40-minute drive to the shop too. So it's not like I can just pop down the road when something goes wrong. So it just became this like absolute pain in my end until I just stopped playing it. And then I was just keeping it for sentimental sake. But then all of a sudden the guitar collection became this heaving mass of instruments. And I was like, I just don't even have the space anymore. So it was like, one's got to go, and that was the one. But it ended up going to a good place because, I'm just selling it on Facebook or Trade Me or whatever I was selling it on. And the guy that ended up buying it, he was like, oh, my best friend just lost everything in a house fire. And the thing that he was upset about the most was this exact guitar. And I was like, well, there you go. I was like, that's literally perfect.
Perfect.
So it ended up being, quite a positive end to my very first electric guitar that I bought myself.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Floyd Rose. Do you prefer a fixed bridge rather than a tremolo?
I do. Or I have like the what my Ibanez back there is that kind of floating, but not the Floyd Rose kind. It's the more easy to manage kind. But for the most part, I like fixed bridge, especially since the transition over into, I mean, obviously I've always been a lead guy, but since joining Alien Weaponry, which is a band that doesn't have lead guitar, I've really had to improve my rhythm playing skills, particularly for heavy metal. So I'm not needing whammy bars and everything like that anymore. So for the most part, the fixed bridge, or now the Evertune, has become sort of much more useful in the type of playing I'm doing on a daily basis.
Nice. Yeah, I've never played an Evertune. Does it feel playing differently to you, or is it just really stays in tune?
Honestly, it's just it just stays in tune, and it's a freaky thing. Particularly for rhythm, I think, when it comes to lead, although it's doable, you might as well just play on the guitar that feels right for playing lead, whatever it is, because but when it comes to recording and tracking, I feel like the Evertunes are a studio beast. I can see that, like, they're the sort of thing where you don't need them all the time, but they really excel when you need them. And the studio is a great example because, for example, you pull it out of the case, it's been sitting in the case for 7 months, and it pulls out and it's dead bang on tune, and you can just go straight in. You can record the entire thing. It doesn't matter how much you've been wailing on those strings. You could do 6 hours of straight recording and that thing hasn't budged one bit. And it's like, that's a lot of time saved in that process versus doing a take, making sure it's in tune, doing a take, making sure it's in tune. Also, depending on the type of guitar, some guitars are just naturally do a pretty good job of staying in tune, and then others have a lot of intonation issues or whatever, depending on the age and the strings and all that stuff. And that was the freakiest thing I saw in our recent studio experience was a fresh set of strings, no stretching. Normally you used to like make sure you give the strings a good stretch. He whacked the strings on, cranked the things up into the dead zone that they have, and it was good to go, and it kind of stretches itself because of that area of for the Evertune to do its however it works, and I was like, instantly, I was like, I need to get one of those. And I called up our ESP rep and I was like, I want this guitar right now, please. And I was like, fastest I'd ever spent some money. It was crazy. It's like, God, if only I'd had this 6 months ago before we started writing all these demos,
Right. Yeah. So when you are writing mostly your metal songs, right? Because you're in a metal band. Do you take influences from other genres of music that then kind of bleed into some of the songs that you're writing?
Yes, it was an interesting thing because one thing I tried not to do was listen to the bands that inspired the band, for example, within the realm of heavy metal. So the band was heavily inspired by Lamb of God, for example, and there were a few songs I wrote. So I sort of like don't listen to Lamb of God while I'm in that space to try not get too, dependent on a sound. All I did was listen to Alien Weaponry, just so that I was really familiar and studied what Lewis's writing style was like. And then it was funny when I was seeing the demos before there's any singing, a lot of the time they would go, man, this sounds like Lamb of God. And I'm like, well, that's probably a good thing because that means it sounds like you, because that's what you sound like, you know? But in terms of then bringing in that external influence out of genre, when I said earlier that I've been writing music for most of my life, film score was like a passion of mine for a long time, you know? So Hans Zimmer was a big influence on me especially when I played piano. And so most of the songs I ever played were songs from film because I love film. You know, a film is like, I probably love film more than I love music. You know, everyone's always like, oh, have you heard this album? Have you heard this album? I'm like, no, I haven't heard that album, but I've seen, 300 movies this year. You know, it's like film is definitely one of my things. So music through film. And when I was writing for Alien Weaponry, we did a show with the symphony orchestra in New Zealand a few years ago, which was a really, really cool experience. And they, got their hands on our songs and tried to create arrangements for a full 80 person orchestra. And one thing I noticed during that experience was when you take the notes, the exact same notation and music that Lewis has already written, and they apply it to an orchestra, it sounds very cinematic. I was like, wow. And like that, before they even start changing anything, it's literally just the context of the instrument being played. And I was like, man, this sounds like it's straight out of a movie, particularly Kai Tangata had that very Egyptian, Arabic, that sort of sound to it because of the scales he uses. So when it came into this upcoming stuff and that I was sort of playing around with, I was like, I would like to try lean into that cinematic feel, so to tell stories, because that's what that band has always done, is tell stories. Even the music videos are very cinematic. When I went way before I was in the band and Kai Tangata came out, I was like, man, this is like a short film. This is such a cool music video. And telling stories, I think, is one of the things that they're really, really good at. So when it came to that influence, I tried to apply the cinematic soundscape kind of thing, whether that's in the music itself or its use of sound effects, or even just talking, like adding a spoken elements to songs or whatever it might be, just playing around with a whole bunch of stuff. I would say that was definitely the biggest external influence in terms of applying it to the Alien Weaponry thing.
Nice. So you've mentioned the new album a few times. That sounds like it's progressing rather well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's about as much as I'm currently allowed to say about it. But we did say, we posted a video of us in the studio, so that's about as much as people know. But we're in the process now of, trying to finalize everything so that we can hopefully have it out for people soon. We're definitely in a point where we can say it's coming. We've been saying it, and we said it at the Haka thing. We're like, it's coming, it's going to be here soon or whatever. So when, not even totally sure yet too. So for anyone who's keen, just know it's hopefully soon-ish.
Sweet. So you mentioned your first guitar was the Joe Satriani, and that's very cool. Did you have an amp that you played with that, or have you?
Yeah, so my dad's Fender Strat, he had and it's like, was my dad's pride and glory, because it's like, it's American made, it's like the real deal, and all this, and he had the amp that goes with it, like the Fender amp. So nice. That, and I still have that amp. If I ever play with an amp these days, I don't, it's all just straight into my computer, out plugins and through your door or whatever. But if I ever need the physical amp, it's still there. And that was the amp that I've always used. Although my best mate, who was this tech head and gear head that I talked about, he had this Vox amp that I loved. I loved that amp. And so I used to borrow it. When I was at university, I asked him if I could actually take that instead of the Fender. And at the time, he was like, yeah, I'm not using it. He was off doing farming or whatever. And that amp I loved. It was like the first amp that I was really like, I just love how everything in the sounds,
That's awesome. Let's see. Is there a riff that when you play it, like it always makes you smile, or just like brings you pure joy when you nail it? So
yeah, so because when I first started playing guitar, I said I started playing flamenco, and kind of I was a big fan of like B.B. King, and then I sort of went to the Joe Satriani route, but the heavy metal thing came a year or two into like my guitar playing. And there was a friend of ours at high school, and he was an incredible guitar player. And it was because he didn't have an electric guitar. his family just couldn't provide him with an electric guitar, and he had like a steel string acoustic, and it had this like crazy high action on it, like it didn't. But he loved metal, so he used to shred these riffs on this like acoustic guitar, which meant that every time he'd come to school and you'd give him an electric guitar, he was like some guitar god because his fingers were like way overtrained for what you were giving him. And one day he's playing this riff and I'm like, on the acoustic, and I'm like, what is that? I was like, that is cool. And he said, oh, it's this band called Trivium. And I was like, I've never heard of them before. So he takes me in onto the computer and he types it up. Forsake Not the Dream by Trivium, and it's the pre-chorus riff, and this is the riff and the song that got me into heavy metal, and I fell in love with that riff, and at the time I could not play it. Even today, it's this kind of riff. It's so rhythm hand heavy, like the picking hand is doing some silly business that I have to like be really warmed up and like in it to play it up to speed or whatever, but it's still a riff that is, for anyone listening to some of the upcoming music, like you'll definitely hear the influence in some of the songs, because that type of riff too is a riff style that I love. And it's still a riff to this day that I just love. Even if I'm just playing around, I'm like, I will always play that riff or even use it as a warm-up. So it's specifically the pre-chorus riff in Forsake Not the Dream by Trivium.
Sweet. That's great. What's your favorite Aotearoa song?
Ooh... In terms of like one that is maybe not necessarily like a released recorded song, the Māori song Te Aho Mai Rā has always been I've always loved that song. I'm not I don't think it's the oldest song, but I'm not entirely sure if the song existed before the like guitar variations or not. I'm not actually too educated on the history of that song, but the current versions of it with the chord progression that is commonly played with it, I think it's just beautiful, both the song and the guitar. It's always one that I love to play on the guitar. In terms of from an artist, a specific artist, it's got to be anything by LAB. LAB right now are kind of, for a long time, they've been my favorite New Zealand musical act,
Nice.
And talented musicians, great guitar player. Joel is a crazy good guitar player live, and I don't actually think that they're on record songs highlighted it nearly as much as if you see them live. He really rips that thing live, and so for a long time they've dominated my like top New Zealand musical act.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask that too. What are your like top 5 New Zealand musical acts?
Top 5 I would be LAB, Troy Kingi, Stan Walker, Shepherd's Reign. And I've always really loved Pull Down the Sun as well, who are another New Zealand metal act. I got a lot of their merch. I got their vinyl on record. That's a cool band and Sweet. A great name. I was like, oh, that's a good name.
It is. It really is a good name. Yeah, they're on the list to give a shout out to and get them on the show. So that is fantastic. Maybe a silly question, but do you think seeing react videos for Alien Weaponry is letting you know you made it more so than you being the subject of the Lady Boner subreddit?
Oh, yeah. That was a funny thing too, because my girlfriend actually sent that to me because she was looking up something, and then there was this funny point where when the social media part of my, career, I suppose, started really blowing up. When you start typing in the name, all of a sudden it's going to start giving you these autofills, and a couple of them were these funny ones, and then when you'd search it, it would show up on Reddit. And she was like, oh my God, this is so funny, and she sent it to me right away. And we were like laughing about it for a while. But the thing with I actually really do like the React stuff.
Yeah.
I used to enjoy watching them before I was a part of the band. I mean, about the band, obviously, because like I said, I was friends with the boys, so it's not like they were total strangers. And because I used to like seeing how people interpreted the cultural stuff, what more so than the music, I think, like I was more curious about the response to the content versus the actual music itself. It was just the added bonus that a lot of those people also love the music, because there's one guy out there too, and I've watched a few of his since I've been in the band too, and he's really like onto it. He's an American guy, I think, or North American of some sort, and you know, his sort of understanding and grasp of the deeper side to the music has always been really good, you know, and I always really appreciated his view. And I used to watch those before I had a public YouTube. Maybe I ought to go back now that I have a public YouTube and drop a comment, you know. But so I do quite like looking at those, you know, and less about the music, because I feel like the music thing is a lot more you know, everyone's allowed their opinion, so I'm not going to be too upset if you don't like the music, you know, and it happens. More so just about how they respond to the stories that we're trying to tell, you know.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I always joke around about like, you know, if I really wanted to blow up on YouTube, I'd just do react videos. But yeah, because they seem to be all the rage. I mean, I see sometimes, you know, YouTube will suggest one and it'll be something just really straightforward, and it'll be somebody who created their YouTube account like 2 weeks ago and they have 80,000 views on one video. And I'm like, what is this?
I know.
This is mind blowing, you know?
Because I did a couple for Shepherd's Reign, you know, because I was like, I feel like this is a cool way to highlight a band, you know. And you're right. I've only done two, I think, and they're like some of my most viewed videos on the thing, you know. And I'm like, obviously it also works really well contextually in that context. It's like alien weaponry reacts to Shepherd's Reign, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's surprising. I was like, man, and I'm like, I feel like you got to do them in a way where you got to provide something. You know, I feel like I see a lot of the reaction things where they just don't say anything. They watch the whole thing in silence and then they go, yeah, I liked it. Thank you for watching. You know, I'm like, man, you know, that's why I like that guy. And I wish I knew his name off the top of my head. Because, you know, he'll be like stopping it and going, yeah, this is what I understand about the culture here. And, you know, and it's like he's adding his 2 cents for what he knows, you know, which I like.
Is that the guy that I watched one not too long ago, but he had on an All Blacks jersey for one of them?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
Yep. I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but yeah, I liked it that he, you know, he made a comment in that one about like, oh, you know, if I ever go to New Zealand, I'm totally going to get, you know, some moko. And I was just sitting there like cringing, going, no, that's not culturally. And then he flashed up a thing saying like, I have since discovered that, you know, this is not, this is not appropriate.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
Yeah. So those ones are, I like those ones, you know, there's some great ones out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really cool. Is it Hatu Patu? Yeah, the story involved in that, and you know how and it's cool that you all are able to pull from such a rich oral history, you know, that has all of this amazing content really to it. Yes. You know, so when I was looking up information about that specific story, you know, and seeing a picture in Wikipedia, I think it was, where like, here's the rock and the cutout where, you know, he hid, and like, oh my God, that's like, you know, that's so cool. So it's I love it. I just love it to death. So it's just so good, and it's perfect. Yeah.
And it was something that surprised me in my journey to writing lyrics, because lyrics was never a thing of mine. I'm still no good at it in English, but I was like, oh, actually, I could probably write some in Māori, you know, just because of the way it works. You don't have to be as clever, you know. It's hard to make it unless someone's really good at speaking Māori, of course, like maybe the Māori speakers out there, but like it's harder to make it like cringe or whatever, so they can be like structurally a little more simple because it sounds good in Māori or whatever. But it ended up being this thing where it was actually hard to pick songs to not write about, you know, because of that very reason. And at the time I'd been reading all these books about our creation stories and all these sorts of things, and my head was like flooded with ideas, and I was like, oh, which ones do I pick, you know? And it actually became like became really clear really quickly that like we got so much we could sing about and tell stories about, you know, like, so hopefully if we have a long and prosperous career, there'll be plenty more stories to share with everybody.
You're right. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So last question here for you. I'll let you get out of here. So thanks again for the time. But when you're traveling, let's go with across the Motu. What's your favorite place to eat when you're on tour here locally?
You know, probably unsurprising to most, I consume a lot of McDonald's. It becomes one of those things. Like McDonald's becomes a very frequently visited location for a few simple reasons. It's got Wi-Fi. So when you're in a foreign country, you don't always have access to Wi-Fi. It's got toilets,
Mhm.
which are very important. And it's likely that it's 24/7. And that is normally the key on tour, is because we're leaving and entering at such odd times of the day that, like, if you can guarantee that somewhere is going to be open, it's going to be McDonald's. And if you can guarantee that it's somewhere close, it's probably also a McDonald's. It's like there's always a McDonald's within a couple kilometer radius wherever you are in the world, anywhere. So as much as I don't necessarily like that I do it, I do consume a lot of McDonald's on the road. But in terms of some of the best stuff that I've ever eaten, I actually, on my maps, I can show you, I save two things. I pin two things on my maps: venues we've played and places that I've eaten that I really like. And so on my map, you can see all the yellow ones are all venues, and all the green ones are places that are awesome places to eat. And some of the best places I've ever eaten were in places like Texas, like the barbecue that they have in Texas. And, these sorts of, America has a real lot of good food. I think they get a bad rap a lot because of all the fast food, but I'm like, if you actually go looking for it, you can find some of the best food in the world in the United States, and some of the best stuff I've ever eaten was there. But also the best burger I've ever had was in Switzerland, of all places, which was weird. And it was super, that was a funny story too, because the guy who cooked it was a huge fan of the band, and he had no idea that we had just eaten his burger that he literally cooked for us. But I happened to do a live stream at the campground that we were staying at. And he was like, and he happened to tune in, and he was like, "It looks like Winter Tour in Switzerland." And I was like, "Yeah, it is. Are you from here?" And he's like, "Yeah." And, so then I start chatting with this thing, and he was like, I was like, "What do you do?" He's like, "I work at a burger place." And I was like, "Oh, I literally just had the best burger in all time in Switzerland." It was like the funniest. And then he was like, "Oh, what was it called?" And I said, "Oh, this place." And he was like, "I work there." He's like, "I'm at work right now." He's like, "When did you come?" I was like, "Literally like half an hour ago." He's like, "Oh my God, I cooked your burger." And then I saw him later that day. We went to a movie, and I was like, "Oh, well, I'll be in this area around this time. You could come take a photo." Because he couldn't make it to the show. The show was actually like in a city a couple hours away. We were just in a stopover town. So it was like this super funny little interaction, and the best burger I've ever had, and it's still the best burger I've ever had.
Very nice. Yeah, I hear you're on the US and the food. I'm originally from Texas, so so very aware.
You're well aware.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that experience of this Texan barbecue place, and I walked in there, and the different kind of barbecue to what we're used to in New Zealand. It's like a different approach to it. And the whole time, our crew at the time, they no longer work for us, but they're from West Virginia, and they were like, "Oh no, man, you haven't had it until you've been to Texas." And we went down there, and he's like, "This is the spot." Went in there, and I was like, I could have sat in there all day, like trying out all the different meat. And it's just like, it was one of the things I fell in love with real quick, was like American barbecue. It's like, it's a whole nother beast,
Yeah, different level. Yeah, for sure.
It is. And it's not like the New Zealand attempts at recreating it in like our American restaurants, like Jimmy Jack's or like a Lone Star or these sorts of places. I'm like, no, it's its own thing,
Yeah.
And the Mexican food, because we don't really do that here. Yep. Tex-Mex.
Yeah, we just cook it here at home all the time. So it's because we had a rule of thumb back in the day, which was the best Mexican food that you get will be in a place with a dirt floor, like guaranteed. Yes. It's guaranteed. So yeah, that's always been a thing. Really funny story about bumping into the guy at the burger place. I was working at a ski shop, and I actually had to leave for an outdoor course that I was doing. But while I was gone, I get back, and all my friends that were working in the ski shop were like, "You'll never guess what happened." I'm like, "What happened?" They're like, "Well, a guy came in to rent a snowboard, and we recognized him and it was Danny Carey. And so we we immediately slid him a snowboard, and like 2 days after I got back, a box arrives and we open it up and it's just full of Tool shirts. Like he
Oh,
sent like a whole
nice.
yeah, because we helped him out with the board. So that was really
Sick.
fun. Yeah, that was pretty
That's a
cool.
fun story, actually. And nice
Yeah.
that someone, and then he paid it back or paid it forward or whatever you want to
Yeah,
say. Like
yeah,
it was some,
exactly. So just super nice. And I think that's the thing too, is like a lot of people don't, a lot of times with musicians and film stars and everything, it's you don't know what kind of person they're going to be
oh,
until,
and it's hit or miss.
yeah.
We've interacted, especially when you go to these festivals, you interact with the whole range. The band it's their first time playing a festival and they're super nervous, or the band it's their first time but they think they're Metallica. It's like you get, and then the whole way around up, you get the Metallicas. And I have this funny story where I was sitting next to James Hetfield while he was smoking a cigar at one of these festivals. And, he was like, he had his security or whatever, but he was just chilling. I was on the phone at the time. And, so he was like chill. But then you have these other bands who were like, I mean, big, but, then they get they got a whole different aura going on, and it's like not in a nice way. It's like
Yeah.
you definitely see it. You do definitely learn that kind of, not don't meet your idols, because there have definitely been my idols that I've met and they've been awesome, and even some that I would consider friends today that like 6 years ago would blow my mind that I'm even like invited out to have a beer with these people when we bump into each other out there. You know what I mean?
Nice.
But then there's definitely been the odd interaction where you're like, never again, so it happens. So it's more like be wary, manage your expectations of your idols, not never meet them. It's like meet them once, but don't be too upset if they don't end up being great, because that happens.
Maybe put them on a hill instead of up on a mountain. So
that's right. Or even better, just exactly the same level, that's always quite a safe. When I notice a lot, when you just treat somebody normally, someone of a certain status or a certain position, they tend to really appreciate it when you just talk to them like they're a normal person. Of course they do appreciate all the thank yous, you've inspired me and all this kind of thing, but I think when you get that all day every day, I'm sure it's nice to just be talked to, and obviously and there's a great example is Keanu Reeves. He's in that band Dogstar. And he was playing at a festival recently that we were playing at, and I would argue, obviously not the band itself, but just him would have been the most famous person in that entire grounds that day, and there were much bigger bands headlining from a band perspective, and they had their whole own area of the festival or whatever. And Keanu Reeves was in the catering tent with the rest of us, eating his food, just rubbing shoulders with everybody else, like he wasn't Keanu Reeves. Of course, he's famous for that, though. He's like known for being very humble and whatever, but to see it in practice, is kind of a different thing. And it's that funny thing, we're like going in there for lunch and, whatever. Sit down at the table and you're like, because we hadn't actually seen this, we didn't know the name of his band. And I was like, is that Keanu Reeves? And he was just like chilling and chatting and, obviously taking photos with people who asked and that sort of thing. And you're like, man, that's doing it right there. He's really living up to his legacy as the humble guy.
Yeah. We all put our pants on one leg at a time. So I think that's,
and I think too, something that became aware of sort of, which helped in our environment, keeping that balance, is like, it surprises you how often too someone that you would consider to be in, insert big band comes up to you, comes to Alien Weaponry and goes, oh, I just want to say I love your band. I love what you're doing. And sometimes that's like, whoa, what the heck? This is crazy,
Yeah.
And so sometimes too, that even just helps you, like, instead of making you, bloated in their head, it actually helps level it
Yeah.
it does bring them back down to like, oh, even so and so has those moments,
Right.
So like even they'll have a little fanboy moment or whatever or a moment of appreciation for somebody, even if they're we're not even in the same league as them by any means, so those moments are always quite cool as well.
Yep. Is there a specific band that you would love to open for someday that you
Yeah, because I mean we've done Gojira now, and I think that was one like that was just so appropriate. I feel like that was such a good mix, for me personally, Trivium, it's like the band that got me into it. I think musically we're not like super, so far apart that it would be doesn't make sense. It's like it'd be a little weird to put us on with like Bring Me the Horizon or something, So and of course, because they're my favorite, and have always been the favorite, and the reason I even have the skills to do this job today, So, and apparently, I've heard stories that like a few of the members of that band are fans of the band. I think the drummer actually asked to there's a photo of Henry and I forget his name, with a photo together because he came up to him and was like, "Oh, dude, I really like your band. Can I get a photo with you?" So I was like, those sorts of things. The other one would be Avatar. So I've become good friends, and this is one of the ones where I was talking about people 5 years ago that I would, that my favorite band at the time. And these are, I was in Los Angeles a couple months ago and was hanging out with them all day, and it's like, but we've become friends, and but also I would love to do a shows with them too because they're very fun. That's a very, very fun one. But I think in terms of like on the real, Trivium would definitely have to be up there. The Lamb of God one, because of the influence that they've played on the band before my time, would definitely, I'm sure it would come into the conversation with like Lewis or whatever. But I always wonder if our audiences would mix, because there's that element of it too, is it's like, obviously sonically we sound very similar, but it's like, does the audience mix? Like the audience of Gojira mixed really well, because they do the environmental thing. We have that element to our music,
Yep.
So, and maybe one day, maybe it'll work out one day.
Yeah. Lamb of God did they do a track recently with Mastodon?
They did. Yep. Who and our managers manage Mastodon as well.
Okay.
So I was at that show actually. They just played.
Oh, nice.
And they also did a track with Malevolence, who was also opening on that tour. Before Kerry King was on that tour as well.
Yep. Very nice. Well, hey man, I really appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough. It's actually been an honor to interview you. And
yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And hopefully would love to touch base at some point in what we affectionately call in the computer industry and meat space someday. So
yes. Whereabouts are you based?
I'm in West Auckland. So out
hopefully
west.
When we can finally get whenever this new music comes out, means we can play new shows for people, because I know New Zealand's been desperate. Only shows we played here have been like festival shows, homegrown, and we played the Matariki Festival. It's like we're long overdue, but I think that's another one of those things where it's like people don't quite understand how it works. It's like we need new music. The promoters just don't. They just don't, it's like, it's not us who decides the shows.
Right.
It's like, so we're like, no, if you just wait, please, the music will be here soon. I think Europe is about the only place that they're like, yeah, you can come play some shows. Why not?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I love that spirit, Europe. That's the spirit.
That's it.
America's the same. It's like, we did one tour and then they're like, you're not coming back until you have more music. It's like,
oh, really?
Okay.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So it's like, it's not even up to us. We can't even come if we want to, So New Zealand is also well overdue, particularly because the last tour we were supposed to do, it was cancelled by COVID.
Yep.
And then it just never got rebooked,
Yeah.
Because so fingers crossed.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you again.
No worries, man.
All the best. Look forward to the new stuff, and I'll let you know when this hits, and get you some links out and tag you on Instagram and all the fun socials. So. Cool.
Sounds good. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Look forward to it. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye-bye. If you're enjoying the show, please hit like and subscribe and ring the bell, and I'll let you know when the next 7 episodes that I have in the editing stack are ready to go.